Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, from the Young People Center for the Arts, Monica Topping. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. I'm your host, Paul Bressoud, and today our guest is Monica Topping. Usually I ask the guest to kind of describe what they're doing first, but today I'm going to start with an incredible, not coincidence, but experience that we have had, and we are the only people in Humboldt County that have ever had that experience. Ready?
Oh.
Here's what we have in common. We are the only two people ever to broadcast a roller derby bout here in Humboldt County.
Yeah. I miss that very much. Sports have never really been like my big interest, but roller derby is so cool. And I love that it is one of the rare sports that I actually understand because of those broadcasts.
Okay, you're also involved in Ink People and other projects. So why don't you tell us about that?
I'm actually currently sitting in my office at the Ink People, so this is a good place to start. I am the administrative director for Ink People Center for the Arts. We are the City of Eureka's official arts nonprofit. We really support and promote so noisy, sorry. We really support and promote art and culture projects throughout the county and even beyond, the counties that surround us as well. We like to say that, when you look out the window and you see murals and you see the art benches on the trails and, public sculpture and things like that, we probably had something to do with that.
How do you do that? How do you support that?
Well, that is such a good question. In a number of ways, one of which is partnering with the city. So for things like the art benches on the waterfront trail, the Ink People sort of partnered with the city to write the grant applications to get the funding to pay the artists to create those benches that went in on the trail. That is one example of how we're involved, is sort of finding the funding to make these things happen, because artists deserve to get paid. And we are all about that happening. Another way is we've got this really great program called the Dream Maker program, where folks come to us typically with an art or culture idea that they want to have happen in the area. They want probably to make it nonprofit, in part because a lot of grant funding is only available for nonprofits, not to individuals, not to for-profit businesses. But creating a nonprofit is an expensive and lengthy process. And if they come to us with their idea and they've got some ideas that, I'm going to do fundraising through donations and through grant applications and things like that, we can bring them in as a dream maker, which makes them part of the Ink People. So for example, the Eureka Street Art Festival that just happened in the last month or so is a dream maker. North Coast Open Studios, which I coordinate, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well, is a dream maker. There's other community projects like English Express, Black Humboldt. There's so many. We've got more than 100 active dream makers that we support, and they get to do the good community work. And we take care of all the admin side of things. So they come in as kind of part of our nonprofit, which gives them access to things like funding. And, they can ask for donations, and we send out tax-deductible donation receipts to folks. And that's a thing that isn't really easy to find in other places.
I mean, it's genius. An umbrella organization like that, being able to bring in all the different individuals. It would seem like that's the way to do it, because people that have ideas aren't going to necessarily have, as you said, the administrative skills or, whatever the proper codes or whatnot are needed to be able to make these projects happen. Is that something that the Ink People thought of originally, that this is our mission? We want to be that umbrella organization?
So we don't refer to it as an umbrella organization. It's more a fiscal receivership is sort of the relationship that we call it. But yeah, this idea was started in the 80s. So the Ink People has been going since 1979. I joke that the Ink People is a year older than me. It's not really a joke, it's reality. But sometime in the 80s, what Libby Maynard, who is our executive director and co-founder of the Ink People, along with Brenda Tuxford, they noticed people were coming to them with these big ideas, and they were feeling like they needed to start their own nonprofits to make these things happen. But through the amount of money that it costs to start a nonprofit, through the time that it takes to start a nonprofit, all the paperwork, and then even once you get it launched, you have to essentially babysit it. You know, you've still got annual paperwork and taxes and things like that that you have to do. And by the time people would finally get their nonprofit status, they'd moved on. They were no longer enthusiastic about that thing that they had initially been passionate about. And that's when they came up with this idea that there could be a relationship within the Ink People to support folks and their ideas. And we support you.
Were there examples of that elsewhere that the Ink People were able to, the original Ink People were able to look at and use as a template, as an example, in order to create the space for people to get their projects done?
That is a really great question.
It's my job.
I have not heard of that existing in other areas from Libby. It's one of my favorite stories about the Ink People and about the birth of the Dreammaker program. But, you know, honestly, Libby does a lot of talking to other nonprofits in other areas, you know, 30, 40 years later, telling them how this program works so that other nonprofits can create these opportunities with the doers in their communities.
Great answer. Because
my job.
If Humboldt County is so unique and amazing, and they're the ones that came up, the Ink People are the ones that came up with the ideas, you know, sometimes we follow other movements that are going on, but are people using our examples in their communities elsewhere?
I think that's pretty safe to say, yes. They're at least getting the ideas and slowly starting to try and figure out how to implement them in their other areas, you know, what other parts of the state, other parts of the country, going, wow, you know, how do you guys support all these programs? And, you know, we've got a really solid memorandum of understanding with our dream makers. So the rights and responsibilities of becoming a dream maker. And it's only been improved more and more over the years. You know, the more questions that pop up, things that change in, you know, in the way that our relationships need to function. We just adjust that document and we go through all of it with our new dream makers. So everyone has a really solid idea of what our relationship is, you know, what side of things they need to hold up and what services we're going to offer to them. And it makes for a really great relationship.
Well, here's the literal me asking this question. Do you actually sit down and say, this is the Dream Maker policy book, and we're going to go? I mean, I used to work for the teachers union. I liked having a contract. I thought it was very freeing. It's like, okay, here's 12.4. We don't have to discuss that anymore. We can move on. Do you sit and go through what's expected with the Dream Makers, or what's provided, I should say?
It's both sides of things. And yes, is the short answer to that. When we bring on new dream makers, which happens basically monthly, when dream makers or folks who want to be dream makers present to our board of directors and the board says, yeah, cool, go for it. You're part of our family now. I have an onboarding meeting with them. These days, the last, you know, year and a half, it's been mostly through Zoom. Otherwise, you know, people come in, sit at my desk, and we literally go through the memorandum of understanding line for line. And as I tell them at the beginning of that conversation, I know I am throwing a lot of information at you, but I'm hoping that, you know, a couple of those noodles are going to stick to the wall. And it may be that 2 weeks or 2 months or a year down the road, something's going to happen and you're going to be like, wait, we talked about that. And always feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to clarify whatever information needs to be clarified.
Does that happen a lot where you go back and talk to the dream makers just to kind of keep them on track, or at least make sure that everything that needs to be done? I know funding is dependent upon, following the rules of that funding, just to make sure everybody's going the right direction?
Yes. I mean, that is a thing that, ideally we would be meeting with our dream makers at least once a year, just to kind of go back through the memorandum of understanding, because we've got dream makers who have been with us for years.
Right.
We've got folks like me, for example, who have taken over a dream maker from somebody else who used to coordinate it, and so never got that onboarding. And that's actually part of the reason that I am so thorough about onboarding new dream makers, is because I went to a dream maker meeting a number of years ago after I'd been coordinating North Coast Open Studios for at least 2 or 3 or 4 years, and found out that there were services that the Ink people offered to dream makers that I didn't know about. It was like kind of news to me. So that's where it became really important for me, just kind of from the personal, experience side, to be like, we need to make sure that these dream makers know, all the ways that we are here to support them. And also all the ways that, that they really need to hold up their side of the bargain. When they put out a poster for an event they're doing, they need to make sure that somewhere on it acknowledges that they're a dream maker project of the Ink people. Throwing our little dream maker logo on their poster is all we're really asking of them, or putting that line of text in a press release or things like that. As so much of what exists in this community that is art and culture related, again, is being done by dream makers. And a lot of folks don't realize that comes back to their nonprofit status being with the Ink people. So it's important that folks know that, and hopefully it will raise the awareness of the community and ideas that they have, like, oh, I've always wanted to do this thing. I should call the Ink people and see if maybe I can become a dream maker. And just to clarify, as far as like funding and things like that go, we don't typically provide funding. The dream makers do their own fundraising. They, solicit their own donations, or sponsorships. They apply for their own grants and things like that. But we track all of it. We do all the banking, the bookkeeping, the reports, things like that. So we're kind of the spot where all of that money is safely kept in the bank. And then anytime a dream maker wants a report, for example, about what they currently have in their account, or who has sent money recently, or, I want to start an emailing list, can I get a report of who all my donors have been in the last few years? I can easily get that information for them from one database or another and send it over, because that is amongst the services that we offer.
Wow. Tell me about the open studios, changing direction here a little bit.
Yeah. So North Coast Open Studios typically is an event that happens the first 2 weekends in June every year. Artists all over Humboldt County open their studios to the public for folks to come visit them in the space that they do their creating in. It has unfortunately not happened this year or last year because pandemic, and I'm so sad about that. But, I've had to do my best to sort of like weigh the pros and cons, and have just decided these last couple of years that it was not worth putting the artists in danger or any public in danger of getting sick, just because we really wanted to make this thing happen. So we will be back. But North Coast Open Studios actually was started in the late 90s by a couple of artists who wanted to see an event like this exist. And they finally, they decided they were the somebodies to get it going. You can only say that somebody should do this for so long before somebody has to decide that they are the somebody. They did it for a few years, and then they found someone to take it over so that they could just participate and no longer have to worry about actually running the event themselves. And that is actually one of my favorite parts because I took over, I assisted with coordinating this event in 2013, and then I took it over myself in 2014. And one of my favorite things about coordinating North Coast Open Studios is that by the time the event weekends start, it's no longer my event. That event belongs to 100 artists, and I just get to show up. I get to take pictures. I get to have conversations. It's so much fun because I'm, aside from, answering the phone when like one of the news stations calls me and says, hey, who should we go and, try and interview? Aside from that, I really just get to be one of the public that shows up at the studios and sees as many artists as I possibly can over the course of 2 weekends.
What do you think the benefits are to the folks who go to the studio, the people who participate by, being the audience to these artists in an open studio format?
Oh, the benefits of going to open studios are so many. For one, there's really just something special about seeing work in progress from an artist that you're only used to seeing finished works from. When you see, for example, Stock Schluter, usually you see his finished pieces hanging in a gallery or up on a wall, and it just feels so like almost impossible. Like, how did a person create that like amazing, work of art? Well, I could never do that. But going to Stock Schluter's studio and he's got a painting in progress and you're seeing where he's just starting out with color blocking. You're seeing him like mixing his paint colors. All of a sudden, these things start feeling a little more maybe doable. So if you're a creative type that kind of wishes that you could become a painter, it's really neat to see these painters that you look up to starting with a blank canvas. They also start with nothing. It's not like they, sat down and like, boom, put out this painting in an hour. It's many, many hours and all the different, edits that they do to it and changes that they make to it. And it's really fascinating. As a creative person, I love to show up at studios and see how other artists organize their materials. I love getting sort of my own inspiration from seeing how someone else, do they organize their like everything by color, or do they organize by medium? Do they have plastic containers or cans that they're stacking stuff in? Because sometimes that also can feel a little overwhelming in a creative space. You've just got sort of stuff everywhere, but then you go and visit an artist's studio and you're like, oh, that's how they store their things to keep everything organized. I can do that. And it just brings you closer and closer to feeling like this is a thing that you can do. And then on top of all of that, there's the conversations with the artists. They're real people. They're just humans that, are doing these things and have been doing them often for years. We are also having a lot of artists. I am constantly working on getting new, lesser known artists, fresh HSU grads or folks who are just kind of getting started, also involved in the event. And it's really, it's a great sort of mutually beneficial conversation for them to talk to the public and the public to talk to them about what they do. Sort of helps them solidify in their heads what the art means to them.
Have you found the artists, enjoying it more as the tradition has gone on with the open house?
I think they really do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten artists like Alan Sanborn and Peggy Loudon back year after year. These artists who have been part of North Coast Open Studios literally from the first year, continue to come back every year. And, for them, there's a lot, much more of a personal aspect in having people come into your space. Also, obviously it supports the artists. They're able to sell their own art off the walls or off their shelves and not have to pay gallery fees, things like that to sell their stuff. So that's beneficial to them, which honestly also to the public, because, if the artist isn't having to pay a percentage of their sales to someone else, often that means that it's, maybe not quite as high of a price. So it maybe makes those purchases a little more accessible for the public as well. Not to say that that discounts the importance of galleries or anything else, because those are very important in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think the artists really dig it. And what I love is when a participating artist is the reason that a new participating artist comes on board, as opposed to me constantly doing the outreach to get new folks in. Because it means a lot when another artist is like, oh my gosh, yeah, Open Studios is so fun. You should totally do this.
Young people, what are you guys doing? What is Ink People doing to promote art for young people?
Through the Ink People, we have another program called the Mars Project. That it's the Media and Arts Resource Zone. In non-pandemic times, it is a drop-in program for youth ages 12 to 26. I realize it can be hard to consider 26-year-olds as youth, but I mean, ultimately, think of who you were when you were 26, right? Yeah, that's still on the younger side of adulthood. And also, really importantly for folks who are that age, a lot of resources that were available up through your teen years are no longer available to you when you get into your early and mid 20s. So that's important to us to make sure that our programming is available to folks up through that point as well. But what the Mars Project is really doing is we've got, at this point, 2 Mars mentors. We've got Corey Goldman, who's our music mentor. We've got Jay Tillman, who's our digital arts mentor. And they really are meeting the students where they're at. So for example, we'll have a student come in that, say, writes poetry, and they set up an appointment, which is how we're doing things right now, with Corey, because they want to learn how to make beats so that they can record their poetry and turn it into music, for example. Or we'll have someone go to Jay and be like, hey, I draw, but I'd love to learn more about digital animation, or I would love to learn more about videography or photography. And so the Mars mentors will meet the students where they're at, whatever skill levels they've got, whatever interest levels they've got, just start there and grow from there. And it's really fun. One of my favorite situations that happened shortly before the pandemic, we had a young person. It makes me sound much older than I want to sound, but here we are. We had someone in the music production room one day, and he was back there working on some production work, working on some beats that he had been working on for a while. And then this group of other young folks came in and were like, hey, can we spend some time back in the production room? I was like, well, you know what, Jamaica's back there right now, but let me go and check in with them. And so I knock on the door. Hey, Jamaica, we've got these kids back here who want to, lay down some vocals for some things. He's like, oh, bring them on back. And boom, we had a collaboration. No one planned on that when they woke up that morning. It was it's the most inspirational thing ever, watching all of these folks who have started, with whatever level of interest and skills that they had, but they grow and become something much bigger working together, which I just feel like is so important. In addition to that, the other layer of things, just through Open Studios, kind of switching back to that hat for a minute, is that I actually encourage youth to be involved in Open Studios. If there are youth artists out there, I do not charge them registration fees. I really just want them to be involved, to make art, to invite people to whatever space they feel safe having folks visit them at, to encourage them to keep making art. So once, they get to be adults, they don't feel like they're sort of floundering and trying to figure out how to get into the art scene because they're already there.
Having had a career in education, I don't think we teach enough art in education, at least public education, as it goes through. So Are you seeing more young artists, less young artists? Has the pandemic affected young artists in any way? Are people producing more art because they need to express themselves during this time? I mean, it's a weird question, but I just wonder,
I don't think that's a weird question at all.
Thank you.
I think that I think that a lot of folks, especially last year when the pandemic first started, folks were utilizing the opportunity when they, were out of school, when they were out of work, to find their creative selves and kind of explore things that maybe they just hadn't felt like they had time to explore before. So yes, that is absolutely a thing that we have seen. People getting more interested or shifting their focus. Maybe their day job was just an unexciting day job for them, and since they were laid off anyway, they may as well start working on, getting their business license so that they could start creating art and getting vendor booths set up at markets or, things like that. So I've absolutely had a lot of conversations with artists to help them build and, become the public artist that they had wanted to be and just hadn't had the time to make themselves be prior to that.
Well, that's a fantastic outcome. I mean, there are some silver linings, as I heard earlier about this. That is all the time we have this time, but I have a feeling you should come back sometime, and talk more art and roller derby. So Monica Topping, Humboldt royalty, really. We should.
Well, shoot, now I have to come back and talk about kinetics in my own art. So I think we're just going to put an ellipses on this.
I've never interviewed a queen. So I would like to thank you for joining us today on Access Humboldt's Community Voices. Monica, please connect back with us and come back sometime. For Community Voices is Paul Bressoud signing off. See you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
This has been Community Voices with your host, Paul Bressoud. If you represent a nonprofit organization and are interested in being a guest on Community Voices, send an email to info@accesshumboldt.net or call 476-1798. Access Humboldt, local voices through community media.